same spot, wearing the same clothes, teaching Talmud just a few hours ago. So they're going to see like 2 hours worth of me tonight. Okay, this is Rabbi Tobin from B'nai Shalom in West Orange. Welcome to anyone who is joining us live on Facebook or who is watching our archived adult ed classes through our YouTube channel. This is March. We are past Purim and looking forward to Pesach. And this session is preparing for Passover, why we do or don't eat the food we do or don't eat on Pesach. So I'm going to go through, I have some materials in the chat. I'm going to give you links to source material as we go. And we're going to dive in. Tonight we're not going to talk about how you avoid the food, how you kasher your kitchen. That's going to be our next session 1 week from tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern. And we're going to go through, all the questions, like what do you do with your dishwasher? What do you do with Teflon? What do you do with plastic? What do you do with glassware? What do you do with your counters? And what does and doesn't need to be cleaned and searched and how and when and all of that stuff. So tonight we're just going to do ingredients, and next time we're going to do dishes, or what has lovingly been called pots and pantheism. I appreciate the chuckles. Okay, so first of all, we're going to do the biblical stuff. We're going to look and see what's the deal with, as they say in English, leaven. What is chametz? So we're in Exodus chapter 12, verse 15, and I like to have people around the room read, so I'm not the only one talking. So while you go ahead, Vicky, you can read the first verse there.
Exodus 12:15. 7 days shall ye eat unleavened bread. Howbeit the first day ye shall put away leaven out of your houses. For whoever eats leavened bread from the first day until the seventh day, that soul shall be cut off from Israel.
Okay, so that seems fairly drastic. Okay, let's translate the English of Exodus 12:15 to English. 7 days shall ye eat unleavened bread, howbeit the first day ye shall put away leaven out of your houses. Can we say that in English, please?
Get rid of your leavened bread and only eat matzah.
Okay, get rid of your leavened bread and only eat matzah. But the command at the beginning, it says, you 7 days you shall eat, right? You eat matzahs for 7 days, and on the first day you remove leaven from your house. Now, if you don't know anything about Passover, you just flew in from the planet Zarg, and you read this verse, then how long is Passover?
7 days.
7 days. What happens on the first day?
You move everything out and don't eat.
Okay, so it's the first day of Passover. Now you're moving out your leavened bread.
You're late.
That's too late.
That's not how the system comes out, okay? So already the language is, be bothering a little bit. It's confusticating. It's confusing because we know that's not how it works, right? But in the biblical world, Passover was not as crazy as it is today for a variety of reasons. First of all, their kitchens were simple. Second of all, their food was fresh and simple. Okay? So how do you make leaven? What is leaven? Let's start with that.
I thought it was a certain type of grain that rises somehow.
All right, a grain product that rises, yeast, fermentation.
Is yeast really considered chametz?
So yeast itself is not chametz because it's not a grain. But it's the thing that makes grain turn into chametz, the Hebrew word for leaven. But yeast, when you buy it, what does it look like?
It's like little granules.
Little dry balls of stuff. That's not leaven. What do you need to do to make it leaven?
Mix it with sugar and water.
Sugar and water. Yeast needs to eat. It needs sugar to eat, to begin to reproduce and bubble and give off the gas as a byproduct of its digestion. So that is where the bubbles come from. And it needs water to live in to deliver the sugar to the yeast and to distribute all, everything that's going on in that chemical biological reaction. So for grain to become leaven, you need water. Because yeast actually doesn't just come in jars or packets from the supermarket, it's floating around in the air all the time. So yeast is actually regularly airborne, particularly during the growing season when wild yeast has lots to feed off of everywhere. It rains and grain and stuff. So yeast is actually a common airborne particle. So if you take flour, grain, ground grain, and you mix it with water and you leave it, it will start to ferment, right? The Irish know this as sourdough bread. In some ways, it doesn't really go through the same process as other bread. Right. So you have a starter, and then they take a piece off, and they keep it, and it's like a 20-year-old chain of whatever. So you have the ability to make a minimally leavened product with just flour and water. It doesn't need to be flour, water, and yeast to be leavened. So I've heard people who are not traditionalists say, for example, you can eat naan, an Indian flatbread, because it's not leavened bread. False. You cannot eat naan. You cannot eat Triscuits. You cannot eat pita. That's bubbly a little bit. But you can't eat those things because it's not about making challah and letting the bread rise for hours with fine yeast and fine flour and all those other ingredients. It's about any minimal opportunity for that to have become leaven. Now, we're going to see why we're so strict about it in a little bit. So leaven is basically grain that has been crushed or ground in some way, mixed with water and left alone for a while. That automatically kind of becomes leaven. If you take barley, for example, you ever make a barley soup? You ever make a barley soup where you soak the barley before you put it in the pot? Doesn't really matter. Put it in the pot, what happens to the barley? It puffs up, right? So the barley grain is not chametz, but the barley plus water can be. Okay, children. Okay, now, next text. Rafe, are you reading? You want to look at Exodus 12, 19 through 20?
7 days there be no leaven found in your houses, for whosoever eateth that which is leavened, that soul shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether it be a sojourner or one that is born of the land. You shall eat nothing leavened, in all of your habitations shall you eat unleavened bread.
Okay, so now we get a little more detail. 7 days, no leaven. So whatever this chametz stuff is, it's got to be out of your house for 7 days. It's the same 7 days that it said you should be eating matzah. Okay? And again, that soul shall be cut off from the congregation. Whoever eats leaven, cut off from the congregation. It doesn't say whoever finds leaven in their house. That doesn't get you cut off from the congregation. Eating the leaven is the thing that... Unbelievable. I apologize. I have children texting me from home about other children. One moment. Okay. Now, the same law applies for a sojourner or someone who is born in the land. All right, so that's somebody who is Jewish, not Jewish, from Israel, not from Israel, doesn't matter. You shall eat nothing leavened. In all your habitations you eat only matzah. Okay. Let's move on. On the next page, there's the law of the Passover, but that ends again on verse 8, Deuteronomy 16, 4 through 8. 6 days you shall eat matzahs, and on the seventh day a solemn assembly to the Lord thy God, you shall do no work therein. Okay? And then, moving the next page, page 4, we're going to try and figure out what these grains are. So page 4. So Mishnah Pesachim, chapter 2, verse 5. Who's our next reader?
These are the grains with which the person may discharge his obligation to eat matzah on Pesach. With wheat, with barley, with spelt, with rye, and with oats.
Okay. So what do you learn from that?
we make matzah out of those 5 grains?
Exactly. So to make matzah, these matzot that are commanded, according to the Mishnah, you have to use one of these 5 grains. And they are wheat, barley, spelt, rye, and oats. Okay? They notice there's no other ingredients named. It doesn't give you a recipe for matzah, because matzah is just the flour. Right? So it's the flour, and then how do they make it into matzah? Well, they grind it down real fine, and they mix it with water. But isn't that a problem? Right? Wouldn't that make it leaven? So they cook it, they cook the heck out of it, hot, 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 fast, 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 thin, 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 the rabbis set the limit at 18 minutes, which is a nice round number. If you want to avoid a biblical prohibition, you remove yourself 18 minutes from it. So, for example, we light candles 18 minutes before the sun goes down on Saturday night. So we're going to bake that thing within 18 minutes of the water first touching the flour, and that's matzah. No time for the yeast to get in there, and if it does, no time for it to do any funny business. Right? It hits the heat, and it gets cooked absolutely dry right away. Once that has happened, it's fair game. And this is the difference between those who believe in what's called gebrachs and non-gebrachs. Gebrachs is what most people do, and that is, once you've baked the matzah, you can then crumble it and turn it into other stuff. So you can make matzah meal. You can make panko-style matzah meal now, and make crunchy breaded fish with your panko-style matzah meal coating. There are some people who think that that's cheating, and that once you start crushing it back towards flour again, you could take matzah, grind it up, put it in water with sugar, and guess what's going to happen?
It's going to be leaven.
It's going to leaven. The yeast is still going to do what yeast does because the nutrients are still there. But rabbinically, that's not how we come out, most of us. Some of the Hasidic communities and others are very strict not to eat any gebrachs during the first 7 days of Passover. But the 8th day, which is only a rabbinic add-on, they'll eat gebrachs on that day very often. Right? So that's their matzah farfel day. Right? I eat happily gebrachs. So all these things in the Passover aisle in the supermarket, the cake mixes, the muffin mixes, the matzah, the noodles, the macaroni, the lasagna noodles, all this stuff that's out there now, the matzah couscous, the panko bread covering, all this stuff, the matzah pizza, the matzah bagels, all those kinds of things that you see now are being made through reconstituting crushed up matzah. I call it magic matzah dust. They make it out of magic matzah dust.
But it still tastes like matzah.
It still tastes like matzah, for sure. It makes you wonder why. Okay, so now we have another command in, oh, by the way, these 5 grains, wheat, barley, spelt, rye, and oats, we do a little rabbinic logic. Since those are the 5 grains of the land of Israel, those are the 5 grains that are being commanded in the Torah to make matzah and not allowed to be leavened. Therefore, they are the 5 grains that you can make matzah out of and fulfill your obligation on the first night of Passover, no other grains. And therefore, they're the only 5 grains that can become chametz. This is really important, right? If you want to avoid the insanity that we see on Passover in the modern era all over the place, you have to start with the understanding that there are only 5 things that can be chametz, as they say, or chametz. There's only 5 things. It has to be oats, wheat, rye, barley, or spelt. If it's not one of those, it's not chametz. Okay? So you have people look at something, and they'll go into the supermarket, and they'll get a bottle of Coke that's not labeled kosher for Passover. And someone will say, you can't drink that, it's chametz. It's not chametz. Oatmeal is chametz. Rolls are chametz. Crackers are chametz when they're made out of the 5 grains. But things that are not made out of the 5 grains are not chametz.
So are you going to explain why is it that okay, why can't we buy these things if it doesn't have a P on
Okay.
it?
So you have the command not to eat it. You have the command not to have it in your house. You have the command, Moses says to the people, Exodus 13:3. Next reader, page 4.
Without my glasses. And Moses said unto the people, remember this day in which ye came out from Egypt, out of the house of bondage, for by strength of hand the Lord brought you out from this place. Thou shalt there shall no leavened bread be eaten.
Okay, very good. So what'd you learn?
Because of leaving Egypt.
It's connected to Egypt. Okay? So this is the first positive rule we've been given. You're doing this because God brought you out of the house of bondage. What does bondage have to do with leaven?
Absolutely nothing.
At face value, absolutely nothing. We have the stories that obviously they fled in the middle of the night and they didn't have time to let it rise. That's in the Torah, right? So it's not really that leaven is slavery, because leaven is nice and slavery is bad. So you can't really draw that analogy directly. But matzah is this, you didn't have time to let it rise, bread. So it's a reminder of that. If anything, leaven would remind you of slavery, which is the trouble they get in the wilderness when they start complaining to Moses. We don't have meat to eat. There was cucumbers and all the nice stuff back in Egypt. You know, they lament and then they will get in trouble for that lamenting. Right? The matzah is the reminder that Egypt was actually bad, and leaving Egypt we didn't have time. Now, ha'emek davar. There's a reason here on the bottom of 4 that's interesting. We're not going to spend a lot of time with rationalizations about what leaven means, but let's go ahead and read this one. Vicki, we're back to you.
Sure. And they baked unleavened cakes of the dough which they brought forth out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, because they were thrust out of Egypt and could not tarry, neither had they prepared for themselves any victual.
I'm not sure you were reading what I was reading. Where are you?
And she went to the next page.
Oh, did I skip a page?
That's all right.
I went to 5.
Okay, that's fine. That's good. Okay, so they didn't prepare themselves anything. Let's look at the mitzvahs on the bottom of 5. All right, so in 12, 15 to 20, we get a number of commands. And these are the ones that drive some of our craziness. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall remove leaven from the houses. We had that one. Celebrate a sacred occasion on the first day and a sacred occasion on the 7th day. No work on them. And then you observe unleavened bread, for on this day I brought you out of Egypt. And in the first month of the 14th day at evening, which is actually the day before Passover, you eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the morning at evening. So this eating kind of gets stretched a little bit, because 14 to 21 is how many days?
8.
It's 8 if you count 14. So you eat it at evening, which you would be confused if you thought evening and morning one day, and the evening of the 14th is actually the night before the first night. Clearly this biblical text is saying on the 14th, and then as you get to the evening, first night Seder, you're going to eat the matzah. That is the only time you are actually commanded to eat matzah, is at the Seder. Which is a nice interpretation, because all these verses have said, you shall eat matzah 7 days. And the rabbis did not codify that. You have to eat on the first day, and on the other days, if you're eating grain, it has to be matzah. It can't be leaven. So you don't need to eat matzah after the first day. If you're not a matzah lover, don't feel forced. Eat fruit and vegetables and all the other good things that are kosher for Passover, and just avoid matzah. All right, so only at the Seder. Okay. We did the discharges. We're going to move on and on and on. Now let's talk about the other things. Page 7. Mishnah Pesachim 1-2. This is a little bit of the searching. Just as far as, we'll do this next time. The mitzvah for searching is to get it out of your house, and they say don't go crazy. Look at Mishnah Pesachim 1-2. We don't need to be concerned unless a weasel or an animal has dragged chametz from one house to another. In other words, once you clean the dining room, you got a dog running around the house, go on and clean the living room. You don't have to worry that the dog ran into the dining room. And it says, because there'd be no end to it at the end of the Mishnah. Which is the rabbi's telling us, don't go crazy. Don't go crazy. Once you clean, it's good. Don't go crazy. All right? And what is the removal mentioned in the Torah? It is the annulling of chametz in your heart and considering it like dust and knowing in his heart that it's not his possession. All the chametz in his possession is like dust and has no use. So this is the sale of chametz that we do before Passover. You sell any chametz so it's not in your possession. What are you selling when you sell your chametz? Only things made from wheat and barley and spelt and oat and rye. You're not selling the Coca-Cola that's in your cupboard because it's not chametz. You're only selling chametz. All right? So all those other items, you don't need to move out of your pantry and empty it out. And if you open up your cupboards and you see it, it's okay. The only things that need to be covered up are the things made from those 5 grains. Those are the only things that need to be sold. And then just in case your sale wasn't effective or there were things you weren't thinking of or whatever, right before we burn the chametz, we say out loud, I renounce ownership over any chametz, knowing or unknowing, intentional or unintentional, in my possession now or that comes into my possession. That we renounce all possession of chametz, which technically is all you have to do. You don't even need to sell the stuff. Because once you've renounced ownership of it, it's not yours. The only problem with that theory is your house can acquire for you. So if something is in your courtyard, it can acquire for you, right? If somebody drops a $50 bill and it blows into your yard, it can be yours, right? There's an argument to be made for that. So anything in your possession, under your control, you could argue the house is acquiring for you. Okay, let's move on. So if that's it, then what's all this other stuff? And all this other stuff is in the category of how and where it was cooked and kitniot. These are 2 different issues. So in the guide that got sent out to the congregation today, you'll receive it by the end of the week, you'll see that there's a whole category of things called batal b'shishim associated with food. That means nullified by a 1/60th portion. It's a rabbinic category that really comes from normal kosher eating. So you have a beef stew, and you spill milk into the beef stew. It cannot be intentional, it has to be completely accidental, and it has to be something that is less than 1/60th the volume of what it went into. And it's not going to be noticeable, you're not going to taste it, you're not going to see it. So what do you do to make the stew kosher? Stir.
Okay.
It's 1/60th. It doesn't exist. It has no existence. If it's less than 1/60th, it was accidental. You can't see it. You can't taste it. It doesn't improve it or notice it in any way whatsoever. It disappears into the thing. It doesn't exist. So the only well, that's good. Those are the rules. So that only works with permitted things. So the milk was permitted and the meat stew was permitted. Right? It doesn't really work if you drop pork in there, right? Because that's forbidden. But it's forbidden ba'achila, not b'hana'ah. It's forbidden to eat, not to benefit from. So there's all these other categories associated with, is there a use a person can have for pork that's a benefit that's not food? Right? So you could have it in your room. You could have it in your house for some reason, but you don't want to have it in your kitchen. Right? And you don't really nullify those things. If a dead something falls in there, you better be able to get the whole thing out. You can't just stir it in because you have treif in there now. Blood would be another example. Right? Okay. So during the year, chametz is permitted. Okay? So during the year, chametz that accidentally is in the food and cannot be seen and cannot be tasted and doesn't improve it in any way. So it doesn't have it's not a preservative, right? It doesn't help. It's there accidentally and invisibly. That chametz is nullified in a 1/60th portion. So if, your employee is at the matzo ball soup vat and he's eating pretzels and some crumbs fall in the vat, is it still kosher l'Pesach, the matzo ball soup?
I mean, under the other theory, yes.
So you're making it a month in advance because you sell it on Passover for a lot, right? So you're making this stuff in January. That crumb disappears halachically as a 1/60th portion. It does not exist. So it's still kosher for Passover soup because it was a permitted crumb accidentally falling in and disappearing and not helping and not being tasted. Those are the criteria. And you can label it kosher for Passover, and then off it goes. And that soup can be bought before Passover or on Passover. Okay? So there's a whole series of things that are in the guide that we've sent out of stuff you can buy before Passover, and don't go crazy. If it's a kosher item and there's no chametz, there's none of those 5 grains in the ingredients, it's kosher.
So basically, like I was told when I was in my 20s, all spices are kosher for Passover.
All spices are kosher for Passover. If the ingredient on the label is oregano, I would say you don't even need to buy new oregano. You can use your open oregano during the year. This is where very neurotic people go crazy and say, I don't know what I'm talking about. If you want to buy a new oregano, I'm not stopping you. Don't ruin it for everyone. Okay? Because your oregano is in a sealed container, in a spice cabinet, where no chametz is normally there. You bring it out on the counter and you're baking and everything else with it. There's chametz everywhere. Right? But it's accidental, invisible, not tasteable, and all that stuff. Are there crumbs getting into the shaker of the oregano?
But what if you say...
You put the lid down in the flour?
I put my spoon in oregano. I put a spoon in the oregano to measure.
And what was the spoon? It was a clean spoon.
It was a clean spoon.
So there's no chametz on your clean spoon.
Right.
If chametz disappears in 1/60th in real food, how much the more so does it not exist on your spoon?
Right.
You take a clean measuring spoon out of your cupboard from the year, and you put it in your oregano for the year, and you put it in your soup during the year. There's no chametz passing around. Even if you put the spoon down on the counter, and there's flour and stuff there, you're probably going to wipe that spoon off before you go into the thing, but when it goes in there, it's going to be less than 1/60th accidental, invisible, and unhelpful and not tasteable. It disappears. It doesn't exist. I can't imagine a scenario except for sticking a pretzel stick in the oregano that would be a reasonable understanding that there could be chametz in the oregano. It's got a shaker, it's got a cap, and it's kept separately from everything else. The usual way to use it is to take a clean spoon or to shake it from a distance. I don't see any issue whatsoever.
My spices are not kept separate. They're kept in my pantry.
Okay. Are they kept in the bag of flour?
No.
They're separate. The bag of flour is sealed. Do you have a flour container with a lid? I mean, you're not customarily blowing flour all over everything. It happens. When you seal the bag, you get a poof and stuff like that. But this is all accidental, minuscule stuff. It doesn't do anything because it's all permitted before Passover. Now, once you're in Passover, that doesn't work anymore. And the reason it doesn't work is because the chametz is forbidden to you. So now you have a forbidden object coming in contact with your food. And the forbidden chametz is any level of chametz is forbidden to you during Passover. A forbidden object does not disappear in the 60th portion. So during Passover, you can't use this rule. So if you're making matzah ball soup and your non-Jewish employee is eating the pretzel and the crumb goes into the vat on Passover, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Passover, you're making soup, the whole thing gets thrown out and the vat needs to get rekoshered because the crumb that went in there is forbidden at the time it mixed. If you made it 2 weeks before, it was permitted to you at the time it mixed. It was accidental, it disappears.
So what does that do to our oregano?
If you buy oregano during Passover, it requires a Passover seal. If you buy oregano prior to Passover, it just needs to be kosher.
And that's why milk, if you buy milk before Pesach,
Yep.
it doesn't have to be that curd.
Milk is the best example. So you,
Pesach,
correct. If you buy fresh milk on Passover, it requires a Passover seal because any chametz from the barn that got in the milk line does not disappear. It's forbidden. But if you buy the milk a week in advance with a good date on it, so it'll last, it disappeared, it's good, there's no chametz, you don't need a special seal. Same thing for yogurt. All these yogurts with the kosher for Passover seal, the reason most of those have the kosher for Passover seal is because of what's called kitnio, which we'll deal with next, which is not chametz.
Right.
Okay? All right. So most products on the shelves in the supermarket do not have wheat, barley, spelt, rye, or oats in them. However, most products do have derivatives of legumes. soy,
Right.
corn syrup, right? Beans, peas, but not a lot of products are made with peas, but mostly the soy products and the corn syrup products. These are derivatives of beans, okay? So let's look. We know, first of all, the beans are not on the list. So beans cannot be chametz. Soy products cannot be chametz. Corn products cannot be chametz. You can eat fresh corn on the cob on Passover at your Seder. It's kosher for Passover. It's fresh corn. Because it's not a grain. It's a legume. How am I going to get there? Because we have permitted kitniot. Corn isn't even kitniot. Kitniot is beans. And don't talk to me about wax beans and green beans. That's just dumb. Wax beans and green beans are completely permitted. They've never been forbidden. They just have the unfortunate name bean in them in English. Right? They're vegetables. Right? They're not a bean. They're not kitniot. You can eat green beans on Passover. You can eat wax beans on Passover. It's not even kitniot.
So beans on your corn?
Corn is not a
Never
biblical
have.
grain. It grew in North America. Who knew from corn? So it was never prohibited until the people started prohibiting legumes. Why? Because in Europe, beans were dried to make flour to make it through the long winters. So you were using this flour powder from the dried crushed beans as if it were flour, and you would add yeast or whatever and leaven it and everything else, and to avoid confusion or to maintain the spirit of the holiday, to not be doing gebruchs
Right.
with your beans, it got prohibited. Right? So is that a good reason? It's a minhag, it's a custom. If you have a minhag and a custom in your family, you should honor it and treat it with respect. And if you outgrow it, God bless you, it's fine. It's not prohibited by Torah, it's not prohibited by the Mishnah, it's not prohibited by the first layers of Talmud or Halacha. It comes as a minhag out of Ashkenaz, not to do these things. And minhag avotenu halachahi, yes, minhag can be halacha, but the question is it a minhag shtut? Is it a stupid custom? And I would argue that kitniot is a minhag shtut. Unless you want to honor your custom, that's fine. No one's stopping you. But to make it mandatory and to call it chametz and to say everyone is forbidden from it, that's minhag shtut. That actually does not have a basis for it. Right? If someone selects to eat kitniot, they're not breaking the laws of Pesach. We have that evidenced by all the Sephardi homes that have always done it. So if you don't eat kitniot and you go to a Sephardi home and they serve you chicken and rice on the plate, you don't have to storm out. The rice is not chametz. The rice is kosher for Passover, just not for you. But it doesn't do anything to the dishes. The dishes are kosher for Passover. You can take the rice spoon out of the rice and knock the rice off it and serve yourself some chicken from it. As an Ashkenaz Jew, you haven't done anything wrong. Because kitniot is not chametz. You don't want to eat it, don't eat it. You want it out of your house? Out of your house. You want to clean it out? Clean it out. You can do anything and everything you want, but there's no actual basis in the halacha regarding it. You know, there's a strong custom. There's lots of people who have written about it. If you want to be told no, you could go to another rabbi. They'll tell you no. Or you can just not do it.
So you're okay with corn muffins and
Yeah.
tortillas and...
Yeah, sure. Corn tortillas, corn flour tortillas have no real flour in them. You need to know that, when they were made and the equipment and all this, because tortillas are coming out of flour tortilla factories, right? So, but if you buy it in advance and there's no ingredients of flour in it, it's got an OU on it, you could say batal b'shishim and off you go.
So you can buy corn flour and make corn muffins.
You can make corn muffins. Why not? As long as you buy the corn flour in advance with a seal that it's kosher and it's 100% pure corn flour. Right? You know there's no other ingredient in there then. If you're eating kitniot, you can have those corn muffins. No
Or
doubt.
you can just convert to sparge.
Okay, so eating kitniot begins on page 11 here. You'll notice the grains have been repeated here. And in Pesachim 114b in the Talmud, Rav Ashi says, from Rav Huna you may infer that none pay heed to the following ruling of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. For it was taught that Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri said, rice is a species of grain, and a person shall be cut off from the people of Israel for eating it in its leavened state. That means boil it and puff it. And a person may discharge his obligation by making matzah with it on Pesach. That is what we call a minhag shtut. That would be a stupid interpretation of the halacha of rice, and Rav Ashi is clear that that is not permitted. Okay? All right, Sefer Mitzvot Katan on page 12. Legumes such as fava beans, rice, lentils, and the like, our teachers have a custom of a prohibition not to eat them during Passover at all, a prohibition that was a custom of the world from the days of the ancient ages. So this is one of the most authoritative sources for prohibiting these things. It's coming from 13th century France. 13th century France is just post Rashi. This is the heyday of the Tosafot world. It's a while ago. This custom's been around a long time. It's got legs. It's got authority. But he says it has been a custom of a prohibition not to eat them. He doesn't say it's forbidden. It's that it's a prohibition that's a custom of the world from the days of the ancient sages. He doesn't have any proof for that. There's no proof that beans and these things are forbidden by the ancient sages because that didn't happen. Rabbeinu Yerucham, southern France in Provence on the border with Spain in the 14th century, says those who are accustomed to not eat cooked rice and beans on Passover, this is a foolish custom, minhag shtut, unless they do so to be stringent, and I don't know why. So he says there's no basis. For Rabbeinu Yerucham is a very serious halakhic scholar. He is at the crossover between Ashkenaz and Sephard. Provence is the meeting ground between the Ashkenazim of Germany and France and the Sephardim of Spain. So he's in between those two, and he has access to both. He's reading from this side, he's reading from this side, and he's reading the Ashkenazim and saying, what? What are you talking about? And he labels it minhag shtut. David Golinkin in the conservative movement has written this tshuva that I sent out to the congregation a couple of years back, which says several things. One, we should do away with this foolish custom because it detracts from the joy of the holiday by limiting the number of permitted foods. So there are those who will say that the obligation about Passover food is to make you suffer so that you can empathize with the existence of slavery. If that's your goal, fine. But that's not the purpose of Pesach. Pesach is a chag. It's a festival. We do Hallel. We don't sit Shiva. It's a simcha. Right? So you should be feasting and rejoicing and singing, and it should be pleasurable. That's why we have wine at the Seder. Right? Wine and meat are the signs of joy in Judaism. So you shouldn't, the people who say, oh, you're supposed to be suffering on Passover, that's what it's all about. I've got Yom Kippur. One day's plenty. Thanks. Right? This is a festival. Be festive. All right, number 2, or letter B. It causes exorbitant price rises and results in major financial loss. And it is well known that the Torah takes pity on the people of Israel's money. It is true. I think that the economics of the labeled Passover food is geneva. It's theft. It is downright theft. The amount of control. Now, for the people who need it, God bless you. But I'm not going to be beholden to it when what they're doing is they're going through extreme things to make sure that there's no kitniot in it. So the label on the Passover yogurt, the ShopRite brand Passover yogurt, usually the raspberry and the blueberry and the plain, you can get it with a kosher for Passover sale starting in about a week. They're not certifying that there's no rice, there's no wheat, barley, spelt rye, and I left one out. Oats in there. Yeah. They're testifying that there's no corn syrup in the raspberry jelly stuff that's been put into the bottom of the cup. Mm-hmm. That's what that's there for, because corn syrup is a usual ingredient in most flavored yogurts. So the vast majority of your kosher for Passover products that are on the shelves, they're really certifying that there's no kitniot in them, because the grain thing is not an issue.
So plain yogurt, it's like not an issue at all.
Buy plain yogurt before Passover. Eat it on Passover. Enjoy.
Yeah. Doesn't matter. As
Look
long
at the
as
if it's OU kosher and the ingredients are cultured
yogurt.
enzymes. You have to know, I guess, where the enzymes come from. Could enzymes have been derived from grain? Then it's intentional. But most enzymes aren't being derived by grains, especially the cheap yogurt. You're talking about artificial stuff, right? So if you have a product from grain that has been derived intentionally in the presence of water and put in a way that improves the food, that's not batal b'shishim. So you kind of have to know that the products are the result of leavening, and then are you using it, right? So, alcohols, for example, that come from fermentation of grain, Scotch whiskey, that's a product of grain fermentation.
Right.
So that's forbidden,
Right.
right? You can't say the grain disappeared
Right.
behind the alcohol or something. You're tasting it. That doesn't work, right? Okay.
I like that, so it's arguing here that the legumes is the reason for exorbitant price rise, not Pesach and
Because of all the problems industrial legume products cause, supervision in industrial food plants is intense. You have to shut down the whole factory line. You have to change out their base ingredients. Why do they use corn syrup? It's cheap. If you put other forms of sugar in to replace it to make it kosher for Passover, you've shut down the line, you've paid for the cleaning, you're paying for the supervision, and you're putting a more expensive ingredient in there.
And Coke tastes better on Pesach.
Okay?
This is made
So
with real
so you have
sugar.
4 different ways that you just raised the price of production on that product. Not to mention the gouging that happens just because it's a monopoly and we're delivering in the retail at the store and you're paying so much for these products. Right? So the price increase does come from supervision in the industrial setting because of legumes. That's the main thing. Because you can, if you're not worried about those things, there's all kinds of products you can just buy. Ketchup. Why can't you buy a bottle of Hunt's ketchup, Heinz ketchup?
Oh, that would be so nice.
So buy it. Look at it. If you eat kidney oat, the only ingredient in there that's a problem is corn syrup, which is permitted on Passover because it's a minhag shtut not to eat corn in the first place. A derivative product of corn isn't even kidney oat anymore.
So then I can buy regular mayo.
Yes. You can buy regular mayo. You can buy regular ketchup.
There's something.
Yeah, Passover mayo sauce.
Look at the ingredients,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
if you're going to go with kidney oat, I mean, even if you don't eat kidney oat, I would say, why are you prohibiting?
Why are you doing it?
Prohibit with the derivative products of kidney oat? Since kidney oat can never become chametz, once you've destroyed it so it's not kidney oat flour anymore, then what are you worried about? No one ever made a muffin out of corn syrup. Right? So the whole logic, the stringency behind prohibiting kidney oat is that it could become like flour. Once you've done something to do it to destroy that potential, that should be permitted. Like peanut butter.
you can't make flour out of that.
But I was told that I could do peanut butter as long as I ground my own peanuts to make sure that nothing else got in there.
Why? Why not go and buy a jar of 100% natural peanut butter in the store before Passover with an OU on it and eat it on Passover? What is possibly wrong with that?
I was told just in case when they made the peanut butter.
And that's the crazy talking.
And
Okay?
creamy.
The level of just in case,
But that's why they said I can do it if I grind it myself.
which is crazy. Who grinds their own peanut butter? Sorry. Okay, sorry about that.
Wasn't it even with the Orthodox beginning to do something for some people? Was like
For years
corn syrup is
they
fine?
permitted peanut oil, and now you can't find it anymore. Very hard to find. Because it's derivative of peanuts. Peanuts are barely a legume, and there's certainly nothing that you ever made into flour, like a bean. So it does make sense. Corn syrup, yes, there are people permitting corn. Remember, all the Sephardim eat corn and corn syrup. So you go to Israel, you'll find certified kosher LePesach products with corn syrup in it.
You'll find that on ShopRite
Now,
too,
if
guys.
you're going to buy, you won't find it here. They have ochle kitniot food here? I haven't seen it. So if you're going to buy something with corn syrup in it, right, and you're worried, right, about kitniot, but you'll eat the corn syrup, then it needs a kosher LePesach seal for you to make that distinction between the corn and the corn syrup, right? Mostly, all these rules we're talking about, you just want to buy all your food in advance. Because once you're on the day, now even if you eat kitniot, you can't buy that jar of peanut butter because you're buying on the day and you don't know. If there's a little bit of something in there now, it's forbidden to you.
Okay, so it's before.
Buying in advance, it doesn't exist. If it was accidental, you can't see it, you can't taste it, it doesn't help.
So, and my jar of Skippy peanut butter that I have sealed in the cabinet?
Read the ingredients. If it's got an OU on it, and all it's got in there, and the only stuff that's in there that's a problem is the kitniot, which I'm telling you is not a problem, if you want to eat kitniot, then, yeah, you don't need special peanut butter.
Max will be the happiest person alive.
And that applies to almost everything that's not a grain product in the canned food aisle, in the vegetables and the fruits and the non-grain products. I mean, you can't buy a thing of soup that's got barley in it because the barley's been sitting in water in the can. But you can go into the freezer aisle of the supermarket and you can buy your steam bag of mixed vegetables. And that's good for Passover, as is. Right? If you buy on Passover, it needs a Passover seal. But if you buy before, anything that's accidental, it's not in there. And now you can actually buy the rice bowls, because rice was prohibited only as kitniot. You can make a pot of arroz con pollo on Pesach, if you want.
I'm not going to have it in my house.
No? Not going to go that far?
I can't go that far.
Okay.
Yeah, my sister-in-law is Sephardic.
And they'll eat rice.
And she'll make these things, and my brother was still won't eat it. And he's not even super religious.
If you don't want to eat it, that's fine.
Yeah.
Don't ruin it for everyone. There's no biblical basis to prohibit it. There's no early rabbinic basis to prohibit it. There's only a minhag out of Ashkenaz that not even everybody there agreed with to prohibit it in the form of beans, and why you would extend that to derivative products of those things or stuff like corn that was not even on that list is just kind of, how far out are you going to keep going? So the question is, what are you doing? What are you doing on Passover? What I'm doing on Passover is I am observing a rabbinic interpretation of a biblical holiday. And I am tapping into the land of Israel, how it was experienced and lived, in a hope that we will never be enslaved again, and that the freedom that we have to live Torah and the ability we have in our generation to return to the land of Israel and experience it, and to try and figure out what God wants from us, and to live and to let this holiday do all that's in play, all that's good. Everything Passover is supposed to be is going to happen, even if I have corn syrup in my Coke. So, it's really, you could say kitniot can be purchased on Pesach. So if the only problem with the Coca-Cola is that it's corn syrup, you can buy it on Passover, because it's not chametz, and it never could have become chametz. Right? So the OU kitniot derivatives don't even need the advanced purchase. So now you've got the yogurt with the flavor in it. You've got your mango, banana, strawberry mixed Dannon Greek yogurt, right? 80 calories, delicious, right? And you look and it's got stuff in the ingredients. If you can determine the stuff's not from grain in water, that the stuff is derivative of kitniot, like it says corn syrup is the sugar, then you can even buy that on Passover. Because kitniot are not prohibited for ownership. You don't have to sell them. You don't need to burn them. You don't need to get rid of them, because they can't become chametz. The prohibition is not an ownership prohibition. And if you eat them and you're Ashkenazi, you don't even get chayav karet. You don't have the excommunication thing, because you haven't eaten chametz. What you get is whatever the punishment is for breaking a minhag. Right? So there's the biblical stuff. So people go crazy. Now, why do we clean? And we're going to do the cleaning next time. The reason we do the cleaning is because on the holiday itself, even a minuscule portion is forbidden to you, with extreme punishment. The punishment being karet, which biblically is either excommunication from the people or premature death at the hands of God. That's a pretty big threat, right? So let's go back to page 10, and let's talk about what kind of chametz has to be gotten rid of, and I'll leave that for next time. We'll talk about how we do it. Animals and chametz. Page 10. If chametz has been covered by fallen ruins, behold, if it is destroyed, it is as if it is destroyed. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, only when it is covered, a dog cannot search for it. So what chametz do you have to get rid of in your house? Chametz that is accessible, recognizable, and can be sniffed out by a dog. So, as a friend of mine has said repeatedly, schmutz is not chametz. You want to clean your kitchen? Clean your kitchen. You want to get rid of schmutz? Very nice. Nobody likes schmutz. But don't call the schmutz chametz. If the dog's not chewing on it, it's not food. And it's therefore not chametz. It's been destroyed. So you have, like, a piece of lasagna has fallen behind the dishwasher, the whatever in your kitchen, and it has turned into that disgusting black lump of alien evil that's back there, right? That the dog wouldn't even sniff and chew at. That's not chametz. It was made...
Scary.
It's frightening, but it is as if you have burned it. It has ceased to be chametz in any recognizable way, right? Which is why some people say that the enzymes that would be derived from grains would not be a problem, because you've completely destroyed it to the point that a dog's not going to recognize it as food. You've made a chemical powder out of it. It's not food. Just like when you burn it, you make a chemical powder out of it, and it's not chametz. So if using oxidation chemistry to turn chametz into powder makes it so it's not powder, then using other forms of chemistry to turn things into powder makes it not chametz anymore. Logical, correct? Burning is a chemical reaction that turns it into powder. So therefore, I would think any chemical reaction that turns it into powder would be like burning. Okay? So the dog doesn't think it's food, it's not chametz, but if a kazayis, if an olive's worth, it doesn't change. If it is very dirty, the dog wouldn't eat it. So there's one opinion in the Aruch HaShulchan, in Ashkenazi, go figure, who says that if it's the size, if that black lump back there is the size of an olive or bigger, it's still chametz. All right, fine. I disagree. I think the dog is the factor. We're almost done. And in the portion of Jezreel, the dog eats the flesh of Jezebel. Dogs will be eating anything. Okay, there we go. Last thing about animals is the dog food. Dog food is almost always chametz. It's grain mixed with liquids and water, and then mixed with all the meat parts and everything else that you're feeding to the dog. So the dog food is chametz. You're not allowed to own chametz. You're not allowed to benefit from it. Feeding your dog is a form of benefit. So what are you going to do with the chametz that is going to be fed to the dog during Passover? You can either give the dog fresh cut beef sirloin for a week, which some people do, or you can sell the dog and the dog food when you sell your chametz. And now you're feeding someone else's dog their dog food.
That seems like a stretch.
It's actually completely correct. You're not allowed to benefit from chametz, and you're not allowed to own it. And what's the category? A dog would eat it. By definition, purine a dog chow is chametz and falls under the prohibitions because a dog will eat it.
Oh, yeah.
So now you have to deal with that. So you sell the dog and the dog food. Or you feed him beef sirloin. He'd be just as happy. Right? Okay?
I have a question.
Yes.
You were talking about the difference between buying something before Pesach and buying something during Pesach.
Mhm.
What do you do about fresh food? Can you go to the store and pick up a couple extra tomatoes?
You can absolutely buy fresh fruit on Pesach. Go anything in the produce section that has not been processed, you can buy on Passover. You want to hear something crazy? I don't see any reason why you wouldn't be able to buy dried barley on Passover. Because it's not chametz yet.
So barley isn't one of the...
Barley is one of the 5 grains, but it's not chametz until it's been put with water. So if it's I could take a stick of wheat, I can harvest wheat, and I can walk around in the synagogue on the first day of Passover with the wheat that hasn't been ground to flour yet, and it's a plant.
You can bake chametz on Pesach, matzah on Pesach.
You can, right, so you grind that into flour, add the water, cook it in less than 18 minutes on Passover. That's what they did. They didn't have matzah food in advance, and this is what we don't do anymore, but we really, the halakha would permit it if we were sane. A bag of flour is not chametz. If it's unbleached, unwashed flour, it's fresh ground flour, it's not chametz. Wheat flour, which means you could make pancakes.
But then you're adding water to it.
But cooking in less than 18 minutes. So you take the egg and the baking soda and the water and you mix it together with the fresh ground flour and you make normal pancakes.
Yeah, how different is that than making matzah?
It's just yummier,
Yeah.
right? So our ancestors had bags of flour in their kitchen to cook with on Passover.
You did?
Of course they did. They didn't avoid flour for the week.
They weren't rooted.
And they made the matzah as they needed it over the course of the holiday by baking it really fast in their oven. Flour itself should be kosher for Passover, but you can't buy a bag of flour because it's chametz. Why is it chametz? Because in the factory production of flour, the grain is washed, and the grains are in the contact with water. They're dried, they're ground. The flour is washed, right? Bleached flour, it's going through liquids and everything else. You have these other processes that are happening to it that would allow leaven to happen, and now you have a bag of chametz. But if you have a stone ground flour from someplace that's not been processed in any way, I would think that's kosher for Passover. And you would just need to have it certified that it was never in contact with water, which is what shmira matzah is. It's matzah that has never been...
Why does shmura matzah taste so bad?
Well, they've really never been in contact with water except for that flash cooking. And they're cooked really hot, really thin.
Those taste like cardboard.
They are like
it.
I like the shmura matzah too if I've got to eat matzah. Egg matzahs are not kosher for the meal because they're kosher for the meal. They're not kosher for the bracha al achilat matzah. You can have egg matzah at your seder. You can't use the egg matzah for the bracha on matzah. But it's kosher for Passover. You just can't use it for the bracha. You have to use regular classic matzah for the bracha.
Friday night, not seder, you're saying motzi on egg matzah. So you just do a regular hamotzi lechem?
Yeah, if you do Pesach Friday.
Yeah.
So if the Friday at the end of Pesach,
Right.
Yeah.
you're going to do 2 squares of egg matzah for your lechem, and you say hamotzi. By the way, all week long, the bracha on matzah is hamotzi.
Yeah.
The bracha al achilat matzah is only said at the seder.
Oh, I didn't.
The rest of the week, it's hamotzi.
Oh.
Hamotzi for matzah. It's the normal bracha. Okay? So, look, if it's got grain in it, intentionally, it needs a Passover seal. If it's got kitniot in it, then you have to make a decision about what you're doing, but that is never the reason why it needs a Passover seal. Okay? Kitniot products don't need to disappear because they're permitted, especially in derivative state. There's no reason. But a fresh corn on the cob, why not? It's not been ground into flour.
I would
It's a
just never
vegetable.
think of it.
It's like eating a red pepper.
I'm going for it.
Corn on
Going for it.
the cob
Well, I'm
is I would
supporting
permit.
anyway.
Yeah.
So my husband isn't.
And so the rule is buy things in advance that don't have grain in the ingredient. It does not require a Passover seal. It just needs to be kosher. If it has grain in the ingredient,